Morning, everyone. Welcome. We'll start at 9:05, just to give colleagues a few minutes more to join. See you at 9:05. Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our industry webinar, eCTD Introduction of Specification 3.1. My name is Pratibha Sobran. I'm the Senior Manager for HPA. Some housekeeping rules. Thank you. So all participants will be muted during the webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation, please pop them in the Q&A platform. Next slide, please. And just some notes on the Q&As. Due to the length of our presentation, we are unable to have an actual Q&A session. So the Q&As will be addressed in the FAQs in the SAHPRA submission portal. Thank you. Could you please present the agenda? Whilst that is happening, thank you. Our presenters for today are myself, Christine Linford and Don Lebetsa. Christine Linford holds the position of project manager at Vector. She has been in the pharmaceutical industry for more than 6 years. She holds a degree in industrial psychology and labor relations management and is currently working towards her LLB. So welcome, Christine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Don Lebetsa. So Don needs very little introduction. She is the Senior Business Process Consultant at Vector. She is the pharmaceutical scientist with 20 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry. So welcome, Don.
Thank you, Pratibha.
Thank
Hi,
you.
everyone.
I'll be switching off my camera now. Right, agenda has been presented on the screen, so we are ready to start. Thank you. So what's new? We've added the following definitions and expanded on some sections. Clones. A clone is a copy of a registered new chemical entity submitted by the innovator with a different proprietary name and application number, but same application ID as the master. Replicas. A replica is a copy of a registered generic submitted by the same applicant with a different proprietary name and application number, but same application ID as the master. Duplicates. Duplicates are the same as master of a new application submitted at the same time as the master of an innovator, generic, or biosimilar product submitted by the same applicant with different application numbers. A line extension is an addition to the product range, for example, an additional strength, dosage form, or new route of administration that is also in new section in 3.13. A rolling review is a regulatory tool that is used to speed up the assessment of a promising new medicine or vaccine during a public health emergency, for example, COVID vaccines, and this is new in section 2.23. And baselines, this has been expanded on in the initial sequence in section 2.2. Next slide, please. So before we get started, I want to just point out some terminology adjustments we all need to understand. So in many environments, the term application and submission are synonymous. A harmonized environment would not be harmonized if we did not all speak the same language, have the same interpretation of terminology. As part of the move to eCTD 4.0, ICH has tried to create a clearer definition of the terms used to describe eCTD. Application, this is the entire life of a product application from the first electronic sequence applying for registration until the product is withdrawn or pulled from market. It contains all the sequences submitted for the product registration. A submission, this is a regulatory activity and it has a start and an end. It is a collection of one or more sequences, including the initial sequence and any follow-up sequences required to finalize the activity and reach an outcome, whether that be approved, rejected, or withdrawn. A sequence. Now, this is what is submitted one after another. They are the packages of information. All information, whether submitted as an eCTD or an e-submission, must be provided to SAHPRA in the form of a sequence. Loose documents will no longer be allowed, whether for a new application or for a minor variation. Everything must be submitted in the form of a sequence, which will be processed automatically by the portal, which is actually the FTP server for now. More of an explanation on this slide, an example actually. An application is created with a submission for a new application with a package of information supplied in sequence 0001. The applicant provides some supplementary information in sequence 0002. The authority reviews the information provided and provides a list of recommendations. The applicant implements the changes and supplies a response as sequence 0003. The authority then reviews the changes and tells the applicant everything is fine except for one small item. If they change that, it will be approved, and approval pending. The applicant then makes the change and submits a closing sequence as sequence 0004. Now, a few months go by, and the applicant now wants to submit a major variation. They do so in an initial sequence 0005 and await feedback from the authority. But before feedback on the major variation is received, a minor variation must be submitted. This is done as an initial sequence 0006. The authority then reviews the information provided for the major variation in sequence 0005 and provides a list of recommendations. The applicant makes the requested changes and submits the next sequence in the submission for the major variation as sequence 0007. The applicant must submit another minor variation and does so as sequence 0008. Now, sequences in a submission do not have to be submitted in sequential order. It is important to be able to maintain an overview of this. Next slide, please. Here, your new ZA eCTD 3.0 sequences. Sequences in version 2.1 or version 1.0 do not have to be resubmitted. There is no baseline required. You will simply continue with your existing applications with the next sequence as normal. You will just have to switch over to the new specification version for that new sequence. So in this regards, please contact your eCTD solution support on how this is done in your software if you have any further questions. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right. The new SAHPRA application portal is a subset of a much larger project where SAHPRA is digitizing processes and content. It is the area, however, where applicant interactions are planned, where applicants will manage their applications and upload their sequences. The portal will help us in automating the processes of providing application information, including the new application ID, the application numbers, as they have always been, and the new submission numbers. So numbers now will be provided instantaneously, with no more waiting for a number to be provided to the applicant, which could then potentially delay the applicant's ability to submit. Uploading sequences will become user functionality and a user-friendly solution. Applicants will have an opportunity to quality control their content before deciding when to submit it and push it over to SAHPRA for processing. Now, the portfolio coordinator and the evaluator coordinators based at SAHPRA will be assigned these submissions based on the submission type designated in the trigger file. Part of the portal development, the status information will then be relayed back to the portal every time it is updated in the evaluation system. This could be the application status, the submission status, as well as the sequence statuses related to overall submission, clinical, inspectorate, naming and scheduling, as well as quality. Next slide, please. Thank you. So before your new ZA eCTD 3.1 sequences are submitted, there are a few items we'd like to point out that will affect how you plan and prepare your sequences. The first sequence number of your application will be different. The initial sequence for all new applications should be 0001. This is in line with the future, the eCTD 4.0 specifies that the first sequence be 0001, Tetra 0 now being reserved for baseline submissions. Many regions have already switched, the US, Singapore, ECOWAS, and Tunisia. The letter of application is your introduction to the evaluator of what they can expect. Critical information is required, for example, virus checks and validation criteria. Important is to include the subject line to state the application number, submission number, sequence number on related sequence. The virus check states compliance to the requirement, which antivirus program was used to scan the sequence, and version. With regards to validation information, include the software used, that is, the version and what profile was used. For example, SAHPRA eCTD validation criteria version 3.1. Any justification required for submitting sequences with best practice errors, or missing documents. This is, however, not recommended to submit sequences with any validation issues, whether it is a warning or an error. For complementary and veterinary medicines, we do encourage eCTD format as the preferred format. However, e-submission guidance will be issued in the near future for all CTD applications that are permitted to submit using an alternative to eCTD. For medical devices, e-submission guidance based on the IMDRF structure will be issued in the near future for all applications. Next slide, please. Let's have a look at the South African specific regional requirements for the regional and the ICH content. South Africa was an early pioneer in eCTD, launching it a decade ahead of any other country or region in Africa. This gave us the opportunity to start collecting experience very early. It also means that some of our requirements might be outdated and in need of modernization. Next slide, please. So in terms of regional considerations in South Africa, both PDF and Word rich text format will now be accepted. All source files will be provided together with the PDFs in the appropriate section. For files where no appropriate section existed in the past to provide a PDF, we have added sections in the new structure. Working documents will be automatically extracted out of the eCTD and uploaded into the new SAHPRA document management system. They will be locked, cannot be edited in the version they are imported as, so that the original file is always maintained. Edits, proposed changes will be done by SAHPRA in a new version. Document navigation requirements. Bookmarks are the most helpful navigation aids an applicant can provide. They are always current with the document and do not get broken over time. Internal bookmarks. Any files with more than 5 pages that do not have bookmarks will cause a warning that should be explained in the letter of application. Hyperlink requirements have not changed for now. Reports generated by new evaluation system showing all hyperlinks created and their destinations. If insufficient hyperlinking has been done, or only the bare minimum has been done, this could lead to the rejection of the sequence in technical screening. With regards to document title pages, and just a note here, document title pages in electronic applications are unnecessary for the evaluator because they will then need to open a file instead of just going straight to the information, meaning that they'll have to click extra pages to get to what they need in order to evaluate. So no need for the document title page. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is my last slide. So with regards to electronic signatures, we follow the rules set forth in the electronic signature guidelines appendices. When the portal goes live, we may look into additional policies. Other authorities treat information uploaded from a portal where password-restricted entry is controlled as signed by the person authorized by the company to upload the information. SAHPRA will very likely adopt a similar approach. So thank you. I'll now hand over to Christine to take you through baselines. Thank you. Next
When
slide.
submitting a baseline, we kindly ask that you please bear the following in mind. If we go on to the next, there are certain conditions that apply to the submission of it. The baseline is always submitted as sequence 0000. It should always be submitted as a separate sequence or submission, and a baseline should only contain previously approved content. So only content that has been explicitly approved by SAHPRA. That is then also meaning to say that new content should never be included in a baseline. If we go on to the next, a baseline for the most part will carry the initial sequence type, and its related sequence will be itself, which is 0000. There are additional ways to submit a baseline, and when we go on to the next, we will investigate those. Next slide, please. An iterative baseline. An iterative approach of building a baseline can be taken if additional time is required to provide modules 4 and 5. Please contact SAHPRA for permission to take this approach. If approved, a deadline to complete the baseline will be issued, and the applicant will be allowed to submit sequences up until the deadline as normal, as long as the submissions do not require the content of modules 4 and 5 for the evaluation. If the baseline has not been completed and provided by the deadline, all further non-baseline sequences will be rejected in screening until the baseline is provided. When creating a baseline sequence for the first time, please do add documents previously submitted in the appropriate part of the eCTD structure with the attribute new. Please do not resubmit documents from previous eCTD sequences. An example of how to do this would be one sequence for the baseline for modules 1, 2, and 3, followed by a later sequence for the baseline for modules 4 and 5. Please use the submission type baseline in each case, and please use the sequence type initial on the first baseline sequence. Please use the sequence type supplementary information on each of the baseline sequences submitted later and indicate the related sequence number of the initial sequence. Here's on to the next slide where we will discuss mid-cycle baseline. So a mid-life cycle baseline should be a collection of all currently approved content of an eCTD where technical issues may hinder further lifecycle management of the application. Applicants should copy the application from the last sequence submitted and create an entirely new application, not as a new sequence of the existing application. The sequence number should be the next sequence that would have been submitted in the old application. The other rules for baseline should be followed, and justification should be provided in the letter of application, along with the SAHPRA contact that provided the permission to provide a midlife cycle baseline. Next slide, please. If we touch on the rolling review previously mentioned, a rolling review will have a similar life cycle approach as an iterative baseline. However, should have the evaluation pathway as rolling review. Start as initial sequence 0001, and information should be provided as soon as it becomes available. Rolling reviews are only applicable in the case of public health emergencies, so kindly refer to the guideline PEM 01, availability of medicines for use in PHE. To the next. When it comes to the letter of application for baseline submission, the purpose of the baseline letter of application is to provide a record of the content used to approve the registration of the product. In addition to the information listed in 2.3, preparing the eCTD, the following information should be provided in the letter of application for baseline submissions. The format used for the previous submissions, be it paper or e-submission, when the previous submissions were submitted, and also indicates if multiple products, for example, multiple strengths, will be combined into a single eCTD application. A tracking table summarizing previous activities with key dates when possible, and previous letters of application combined into a single bookmarked document and placed as an annex to the baseline letter of application when possible. In Module 1, sequence-specific administrative documents such as your application forms, proof of payments, electronic copy declarations, etc., do not need to be included. On to the next, please. When we touch on the submission type matrix that has been added, at times an applicant may wish to submit more than one submission in a single sequence. In an eCTD application, this can be done through work grouping. The South African SAHPRA envelope is designed to allow applicants to designate multiple submission types in a single submission. Not all combinations of submission types, however, are allowed. Work grouping can lead to issues when one of the submissions combined in the work grouping is withdrawn, or when one of the submissions combined in the work grouping is rejected. So please keep that in mind. The submission type matrix is available on the eCTD submission website. I will now hand over to Don to relay the envelope elements to you. Thanks, Don.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine. All right, so we're going to have a quick look at the new envelope for the specifications 3.1. So currently, the SAHPRA specifications version 2.1 has a simple envelope providing the basics for managing an eCTD application. But with the introduction of automated processes, we need to be a bit more information from the applicant, as this metadata helps to categorize the content provided. We also need the flexibility to update controlled vocabularies without being bound by the current and old style where all defined lists are written into the DTD. Okay, thanks, Mel. Next slide. Right, so a quick comparison of the specs 2.1 versus the 3.1. In the new 3.1 envelope, we have kept almost everything that was in the old 2.1 envelope, with the exception of the applicant and submission efficacy type and description, as these had no value for the new processes and has been removed. So the new envelope shows the structure of the application, the submission, the sequence, and the information is broken down into these levels. The multiple applications already existed, so this has been kept unchanged. So please continue to provide the information exactly as per the current process. The contact information, this is being collected now so that you are able to receive your automated communication. So you would have already noticed that the person's email that is on your trigger file currently, that's the person that is getting the automated feedback on your validation, whether it has passed or failed on your sequence. Thanks, Mel. Next slide. Right, so with the new envelope 3.1, the specifications give us clear information on the constraint and occurrence of each envelope element, as well as whether or not a defined list for control vocabularies exists on the SAHPRA eCTD website. So where elements existed before, the naming conventions have been maintained to ensure consistency with software vendors providing solutions and to make Lifecycle and the move from 2.1 to 3.1 easier. And also the new elements have been given element names consistent with the approach to date. So constraints, this simply means whether a document is either mandatory, or rather content is either mandatory or is optional. And occurrences, this is whether this can be a single entry or if it's unique. So a single entry, for example, would be your application number. No, sorry, your application identifier. So this is currently your application folder, right? You can only have one of those. And then application numbers, these are multiple entries. You can have more than one, but they have to be unique. And then with your multiple, this is, for example, with your multiple applications. So these would be, for example, with your clones and duplicates. The only differences here would then be your proprietary names and application numbers. Thanks, Mel. Next slide. Okay, so with these defined lists, we have them stored and maintained on the SAHPRA eCTD website. These are accessible to all software vendors and applicants alike. These give us, again, the flexibility to be able to expand on them and also retire a value at any given point in time because these are no longer written on the DTD. The lists are coded, meaning that the values associated with codes can be updated without affecting the past data that has been received. Thanks, Mel. Next slide. Okay, so just a little bit more on the application elements. So we've got the application type. This is a new category. And so as not all applications may be based on processes other than the South African national procedure, we have this element expanded to include the rest of the application types like your AMA submissions and the like. And then we have the application ID. This is now independent of the application numbers, as that does or can change over time when you have new strands added or removed. The ID is for the eCTD and not product specific. So this is no longer attached to your application number or your product number, right? So the application number, this is unchanged. And this will be automatically issued by the new portal. This will continue to be the current 6-digit new application number or the other previous numbers that we had with the alphabets. If it was the A390 whatever or the B1648, those would still be no, rather, so the current ones that are going to be created by the portal, these will be 6 digits and they will not be taking into account those previous versions or naming conventions. The proprietary name and the dosage form and the INN, these will remain unchanged. And then the master files for your API mavs, PMFs, and VEMs, please do provide these for your API manufacturers and final products. The site master files, these should include or take into account all the sites that you currently are completing on your section 121. Right. So these new numbers also, they help with automation moving forward, linking the application to the information linked to those identifiers. Thanks, Mel. Next slide. Okay, so this is the example of what is on the application defined list. As I said earlier, we don't only have the SAHPRA national procedure, we then accommodate for the AMAs, Azibona, the WHO PQs and SRA CRPs, and so on. Thanks, Mel. Next slide. Okay, so now on to the next level, which is the submission level. So the submission type. So this was a bit of a tricky area because when we adopted the EMA variations guide, our list on the envelope was no longer corresponding with this. So our submission types were disconnected to the reality. So now this has been aligned to what we currently have as the submission types. The evaluation pathway, this is a new element. This will help to determine priority status and the type of evaluation to be processed. And this is also important for statistics. The submission lead, this is a new element as well. This will help to determine the portfolio and evaluation coordinators that need to be assigned to a submission. This is also very important for statistics. The submission number, this is also a new one. This is an identifier for each of your regulatory activity to increase searching efficiency and also provide a unique number to help bundle all information surrounding a particular submission. Thanks, Mel. Next slide. All right, so you would have seen this before already on your trigger files. So with our submission types, these are broken down into 4 or 5 categories. On your left, we have your new applications, and then we have the line extensions, the clones and replicas, and then we have the variations, the type 1s and type 2s on the right-hand table. And then we also have the miscellaneous at the bottom, your Z codes and baselines. And you would also notice, because of the flexibility that we now have with this defined list, in post-April, when we launched the 3.0, we then realized that there's a few submission types that are missing, like your related so like your type 1B related clinical or related quality and related inspectorate, and we were able to swiftly add those without any impact on the current 3.0 that was launched in March. So that just goes to show how quickly and how efficient the move to the defined lists can be done. Thanks, Mel. Next slide. Right, then we have the submission lead. This determines which conveyor belt your sequence is placed on. So is your sequence a biological or orthodox or veterinary? So that is what the submission lead does within the system. The evaluation pathway determines the speed of your conveyor belt. So just note that sequences will be rejected if you put in the incorrect evaluation pathway, and this does get discovered at screening. So this will then be rejected. Thanks, Mel. Next slide. Right. And now the sequence elements. So this is an entire new categorization. So the sequence type, this has been adopted in other regions globally already. So we are just aligning with the global harmonization efforts. This helps to determine if we are working with an initial sequence or if this is a follow-up of a submission that has already been submitted. And then the sequence description, these should be kept very short and precise. They shouldn't necessarily repeat the sequence type. So an example of your sequence description would be an additional API manufacturer or something along those lines. They need to be short and to the point. Your sequence date, this will be used for validation purposes. All values in the defined list are valid for specific version, and those versions are valid for a specific time. These dates ensure that the values provided are valid at the time of submitting. As part of the validation, we are also checking if these were submitted within the 30 days time the sequence is being validated. The sequence number, this remains unchanged. The related sequence number, so this, again, we're no longer going to have a related sequence number as none. The related sequence number should always refer to the initial sequence of that submission. So the initial sequence would then reference itself. So if you are submitting your submission as a 0002, and that being the initial sequence of your regulatory activity, it would then refer to itself as the related sequence number, which will then be the 0002. Thanks, Mel. Next slide. Okay, so this is just the list of the sequence types. And again here, initially when we launched 3.0, we did not have biologicals, renewals, and PVs. These were added sometime in April, May, and we updated the list accordingly on the SAHPRA eCTD website as well. Okay. Thanks. Right. Okay, so with the multiple applications and contact elements, the multiple application section, this remains unchanged. The sequence elements for the contact type, this is a new category, and this is where you put in the details of the person that should be receiving the automated communications back from SAHPRA on the validation pass or fail of your sequence. Thanks, Mel. Okay, so on the defined list for the contacts, you either have the local applicant who is doing the sequence submission, or this could be your regulatory contact or technical contact internally, or you could also just have product information or general. Thanks, Mel. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to hand back to Christine to take us through the new headings in the specs 3.1.
Thanks, Dawn. So as previously mentioned, as part of the harmonization efforts, we have moved some sections, added other sections, elevated a few sections to structural nodes with new subnodes, and renamed a few others. To help industry understand the changes, we have provided a color-coded change control document that you can find on the new SAHPRA eCTD website, alongside the specification document. These details have been added, are new, changed, or deleted. Some things have been moved to make evaluation more efficient. Additional granularity has been created in some sections to help validate whether content is being provided for certain submission types. And where content was removed or moved, the old section was not reassigned to help prevent confusion between versions. So those sections will remain empty for future. Next slide, please. So we can now see that section 1 has been renamed to correspondence, and the letter of application has been moved to a sub-element. So out of a single node, we have created a more granular approach. So you can see under the letter of application, it is now accompanied by a note to the evaluator, a correspondence from SAHPRA, a response to a SAHPRA request, and meeting information. This allows us to validate whether the recommendation and response documents have been provided for each response, and we can also make it more transparent when the desired note to evaluators are being provided. These help the evaluation when addressed in the submissions, and information relating to meetings, such as pre-submission meetings, are easier to find over time. Please note there are special lifecycle rules that apply to this section, which we will address in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Moving on to the application, an important thing to note is the proof of payment may fall away from the requirement in future. As we implement the payment communication between Sage and our portal, when submitting sequences will no longer be possible without payment confirmation. So please take note of that. So new sections have been added in 1.2.2.9 for a declaration of sameness for the replicas and clones. 1.2.2.10, a letter of permission from the HCR for the replicas. 1.2.2a, which is additional annexes, which I will discuss in a moment. 1.2.3, change in applicants, which now contains a letter of authorization from the product owner to the new registrant, and a written confirmation of handover of the dossier. A new element has been added in 1.2.4 for a patent declaration. And if we look at 1.2.5, we can see all checklists and validation templates have been moved from 1.8 to this element. So the intention is to reduce the size of the validation template and the need to hyperlink to the sections provided. This will happen through an internal automatic report generation of new evaluation systems. So please be on the lookout for updates to the validation templates as we get settled into our new system. And then in 1.2.a, we have additional administrative information. The section accompanied 122A additional annexes is purely there to provide us with structural flexibility should any new requirements come up between now and the next specification update. Please on to the next. The South African product information. We can see there has been a change in title from package insert to reflect professional information. The clean and annotated versions of the PI and PIL have been moved from section 155 to the same location in 1.3, providing specific subnotes for the approved, clean, and annotated content. This will improve efficiency and reduce hyperlinking requirements as all information is located next to each other. We can also see the standard references have been broken down into more specific sections, which is the reference product local and other references. So your reference product local will contain, for instance, your South African Innovator PI, and your SMPCs will fall under other references. The labels have also been broken down into approved, clean, and annotated, so please take note of that. And the foreign prescribing and patient information has been moved from 1.10.3 to 1.3 for better and easier access by the evaluation teams and comparing product information with that which is provided in other markets. A new section has been added in 1.3.6 for artwork and samples, and in 1.3.6.1, a statement confirming submissions of samples has been added, and in 1.3.6.2, artwork and pictures of samples have been added. And then we can see in 1.3.6.3 and 4 respectively, moved from 1.7.10 are the batch manufacturing records of the samples and COA of the samples. It's purely done to keep all sample information together. Please move on to the next slide. So for section 1.4, the information about the experts, no changes have been made here, so we can go on to the next slide. 1.5, specific requirements for different types of applications. So now we can see the medicine register details have been broken down into more specific sections. So we can see the medicine register details are now located in 15221, and then accompanied thereafter 15222 are all the registration certificates. Again, please note 155, the PI and PIL amendments have now been removed and no longer exist as a section, so please do not populate that. In section 1.5.6, a section has been made or the section has been moved rather, apologies, from 1.11, the bioequivalence trial information, and it has been broken down into more specific sections to make space for the BPIF and biowaivers, respectively. A section in 1.5.7 has also been added for abridged and verified review templates and documentation. And then an additional types of application-specific requirements have been added in section 1.5.8, again for structural flexibility for any new requirements. Please also note that the special lifecycle rules apply here. Please on to the next. For the environmental risk assessments, we can see no changes have been made here, so we can move on to the next. For the good manufacturing practice, we can see section 1.7.6 has been removed and moved to section 110.6. Section 1.7.10 has also been removed, and in section 1.7.11, there's only been a change in title to reflect manufacturing permits. The element name is still the same as well as the note content. We can also see in section 1.7.14 that a new note has been added for PQR, and then 1.7a again for structural flexibility for any additional documents. These, again, special life cycle rules apply to this section. Please move on to the next. Section 1.8 is now information relating to pharmacovigilance. The previous details of compliance with screening outcomes has now been moved to section 1.5. This is the only example where a moved section number has been reused. And this is simply for the reason to harmonize with other regions, as 1.8 is generally information relating to pharmacovigilance. So we can see in 1.8.1, pharmacovigilance systems have been added, which is new. And then your risk management plan, which was previously located in 1.13, is now moved to 1.8.2. So 1.13 will no longer be used as a section. The special life cycle rules also apply here. Please move on to the next. For 1.9, the individual patient data, statements of availability, then no changes have been made, so we can move on to the next. For the foreign regulatory status, we can see 1.10.1 has undergone a change in title to reflect the tabulated list of foreign regulatory status. And we can once again see that 1.10.3 has been removed from the section. And 1.10.4 has now been broken down into more specific sections, which is the document data set similarities will now be found as a sub-element and then accompanied by a declaration of sameness. In 1.10.5, a section has been created for the RRA reports, and then we can see moved from 1.7.6, we can see the VU certification scheme in 1.10.6. Next slide, please. For the pediatric development program, no changes have been made. Slide, please. 1.A, additional data, again, just provides us with structural flexibility should any new requirements come up between now and the next certification update. We have the next slide, please. So now the special life cycle rules. Several sections have either been moved or elevated and made into a structural node with multiple sections defined as subnodes. The ICH rules only allow applicants to provide content at the lowest level of the defined structure, meaning content is no longer allowed in the old locations they have been elevated. Sections that have been moved only exist in the new location, meaning that content is no longer allowed in the old location. Content can no longer be submitted as new or replaced in the old location. Content must be removed using the delete operation and replaced in the new location as new to perform any replace operation of existing content. Please note that this is not necessary until a replace is necessary. Applicants should not fix this until it is a necessary step to take. Please go on to the next slide. So for product information for new applications should be placed in the approved section. The leaf title should clearly state that it is the proposed product information. And once this has been approved, the proposed content should be replaced with the approved content. And the leaf title should be updated to indicate it has been approved and accompanied by the date of approval. Once product information has been approved, any further proposed changes should be submitted in the clean section, and the annotated copy of the proposals should be placed in the annotated section. The current approved product information from an earlier sequence will be visible, so there is no need to resubmit the approved product information. Once the proposed changes have been presented in clean, have been approved, a closing sequence should be provided that transfers the content from clean to approved. Only reference to the content provided in the earlier sequence under clean should be provided. The physical files should not be provided again. Please see section 3.8, reusing files, for more information on reusing content already submitted. I will now hand back to Don to relay the validation criteria to you. Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Christine. I'm cognizant of the time. We only have 5 minutes left. So I'm going to go at a speed of lightning with the validation criteria. So this, we have sorry, we have now broken it down into the 6 elements instead of the previous 21 part validation criteria. So we have the part 1 and 2 that deals with the XML files, and then the files and folders in general. Then the part 3 focuses on the ICH backbone requirements. 4 looks at the South African regional backbone requirements. 5, this is for the STF backbone requirements. 6 focuses on the PDF analysis and compliance, such as your bookmarks, hyperlinks, and the properties. Next slide. Okay, so we now refer to errors and warnings in line with the rest of or many of the other regulatory authorities around the globe. An error will result in an automatic rejection, and the sequence must be submitted again. So your error would correlate to your previous pass or fail criteria, and your warning would then be your previous or current, the best practice. So information is collected for some criteria, for example, with content reuse. This can aid in the technical screening process to understand the information provided better, and the analysis of hyperlinks has not been included in the validation criteria. This is being done as an additional internal check. Next slide. Okay, so we now also have rules for the content reuse. We collect information on that. We collect information on the lifecycle management at a deeper lifecycle level checks. We look at the operation use, and we also, in terms of the file existence, we look at the file checks and the granularity. Next slide. Okay, so with the envelope checks, we look at the submission types and correlate if this is in line with what is in the submission type matrix. Are you putting together the likes to likes? And we're also looking at the sequence type. On the content, we're looking at the file existence. So if a document should exist, we're looking at that, and that should be in line with the document matrix. And we're also looking at the whether that would be then an error if a document is missing, or a warning, or possible if a document is expected but it is not there. We also look at the content checklist. This is intended to reduce the validation template requirements in the future. Next slide, thank you. Okay, so this is the document matrix. You can see this basically maps out, for example, you cannot submit a sequence without a letter of application. So by default, then if that document is missing, we would have an E. And then we have the P, where a document should be or is expected to be there. We would have the criteria possible and so on. Thanks, Mel. Next slide. Right. And then with the PDF analysis, we check if the PDF files are corrupt, can be opened, and are readable. We also prefer that bookmarks be your number one source of the navigation tools, increase on those. And we've also increased the checks on the number of bookmarks to ensure that they exist and that they are functional. With hyperlinks, again, for your module 2 and 3, those are highly granulated with your ICH. Those would be redundant or almost, so we would prefer that rather focus on the hyperlinks on your module 4 and 5 content. But we do have new validation criteria there. And then with the PDF properties, we look at the readability, the security, and an exemption here would be with your literature references. We also then look at the password protection. Thanks, Mel. Okay. 10 o'clock on the dot. This is a closing slide for Pratibha to talk through. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Christine. And yes, thank you for keeping to time. So we have seen lots of systems, processes, some changes. The implementation timeline is October 2024. So let's work together in order to achieve a positive outcome for all. Webinars will continue every 3 weeks is what we're planning for. So the next will be the 30th of August. Please attend. The topic we're looking at there is processes to be followed for example, transfer of applicancies, replicas, clones, etc. So we will really appreciate your attendance. Thank you for the questions. I have actually been looking at them. We will obviously go through those and see, pick up topics for future webinars from there. So thank you, 10:01. Have a lovely long weekend, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.